he messianizes Old Testament passages and he applies them to himself. Well, Jesus modifies the Shema, love God with your heart, soul, and strength, and he adds mind. Love me with all of your mind. And that's where the Christian faith gets so exciting, when our faith is utterly different. Like, the deeper you go in Islam, the more it crumbles. The deeper you go in Christianity, the stronger it is. And so this is where I hope, and this is where I really appreciate you and your questions, Kerby, especially bringing up part 2. We have to recover the great intellectual tradition of our faith. I mean, Christians outthought all the competition. This is why Christianity gives birth to Western civilization as we know it. We advance as a civilization and a society because of Christian values.
We bring back to the microphone Dr. Jeremiah Johnston. If you are not familiar with him, he is an individual that, first of all, is the head of the Christian Thinkers Society. We have information about that on our website. He also is a pastor of apologetics and cultural engagement at Prestonwood Baptist Church, dean of spiritual development at Prestonwood Christian Academy, as well as a number of other credentials. Let me hold up a whole series of books here. Here is one that came out more than 11 years ago called Unanswered, Lasting Truth for Trending Questions. One that came out after that, Unimaginable, What Our World Would Be Like Without Christianity. And, of course, one of the books we talked about more recently was The Body of Proof, the 7 Reasons to Believe in the Resurrection of Jesus and Why It Matters Today. Also, of course, I might just mention his Peace of God Bible, which we've talked about on this program. But today we're going to focus on his newest book, The Jesus Discoveries, 10 Historic Finds that Bring Us Face-to-Face with Jesus. So, Dr. Jeremiah Johnston, welcome back to Point of View.
So great to be with you, Kerby, and just always love our conversations, and so thankful to the Lord for the ministry of Point of View.
Let me, if I might, for just a minute, some people remember Where's Waldo? We're playing the game Where's Jeremiah Johnston these days, because I saw a clip the other day where you were at Cascade Hills Church, which I believe is in Georgia, and I think you were in the midst of, again, showing the shroud. So I never quite know where you're going to be.
It's amazing. I go wherever God opens a door where I can share the truth of the gospel, and it never ceases to amaze me how it transforms people's lives.
Well, one of the networks that broadcasts this program, one of many, is in Augusta, Georgia. And a while back, I guess really almost 2 years ago, we were actually at a restaurant meeting with some people that were listeners. And that restaurant's real close to Warren Baptist Church, where Pastor David McKinley is. And I look up and there's a sign about the shroud display being there. So for our Georgia listeners, it turns out that if you would like to see some of the things we're going to talk about, you're probably in the right place because you seem to be making the tour.
That's exactly right. It's at Columbus, Georgia right now at Cascade Hills Baptist Church through Thursday of this week. It's all free. It's open and available to the public.
Well, again, I jokingly say I never know where you're going to be because, let's see, you were at Davos. You were with Glenn Beck, not only in this country, but in Italy with him when you were there at the Shroud. Eric Steckelbach, Sadie Robertson, Sean Ryan, Michael Knowles. Hope you're trying to straighten out that Michael Knowles guy, but nevertheless, you are everywhere. So it is very, very encouraging to have you join us today here on Point of View. The book is entitled The Jesus Discoveries, and we're going to talk about some of the archaeological discoveries, but then there's a part 2 and 3, which talk about the Christian mind, which is a great promotion for the ChristianThinkers.com website and how to dig deeper. But in some respects, let's talk about why you have actually written this, because maybe you've had this question where your kids come up to you and they say, okay, Dad, we believe Jesus exists because of the Bible, but do we have any evidence outside of the Bible that Jesus exists? You ever had that question?
Oh, Kerby, you've just hit the nail on the head. That's the whole reason I wrote this book is, as a dad of 5, my highest priority after following Jesus is passing the faith on to my kids. And what's really cool about this book is it's so readable. It's crisp chapters written for the layman. My 9-year-old son, Abel, was reading me a chapter the other night, and that is by design. I'm not writing for scholars in this book. I'm writing to give answers to men and women who just have questions and they need quick, crisp answers. I'm sure a thinker like yourself would appreciate too. I went to great lengths to get permissions for all the photographs in the book because I want people to experience right in the book these discoveries like they're holding them in their own hands. And so my children challenged me. That they said, Dad, what do we know about Jesus? But hold on, before you talk, Dad, you can't use the Bible. What do we know about Jesus outside of the Bible? And it turns out I wrote a whole book and said, hold my Diet Coke, I'm going to write a book to answer you. And it's so fun that our faith is so evidence-driven. And Kerby, this is something I'd really like to just focus on, if you don't mind, because it seems to be resonating with people. Faith is always defined by its substance. Okay, it's faith defined by the way I like to say it is faith is always defined by its object. What are you believing in? And in the Christian tradition, we have a set of facts and a person, Jesus, and the death, burial, and physical bodily resurrection of Christ that we place our faith in. When we place our faith in Jesus and those facts, we are forgiven. So there is an evidence-based Christianity that the Bible talks about from the earliest days. Acts 1:3 says, after his suffering, he, Jesus, presented to them and gave, I love this, Kerby, many convincing proofs that he was alive. He appeared to them over a period of 40 days and spoke about the kingdom of God. And so for the Christian out there who's like, I don't need to listen to this broadcast. I have faith. You know, we're not celebrating our faith. It's not faith in faith. We can always grow closer to Jesus. What we're celebrating is that we have an evidence-based faith, that the things that occurred in the Bible really happened. They were real people, real places, real events, not legend, not fairy tale, not lore. And guess what? The archaeology bears that out. The excavations that bear that out are strikingly remarkable. And then there's discoveries that most believers are totally unaware of that are so powerful that confirm, that's the term I use, they confirm the message of the Bible in wonderfully assuring ways. And so I just wanted to grab the reader and guide them by the hand and say, let me just walk you through the fact that we can know 65 facts about the birth, the life, the miracles, the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus from extra biblical sources before we ever crack open the Bible. And no other religion can say that. And so I also want to challenge our audience, make sure that you're not more pious or godlier than the writers of the New Testament. I meet some Christians, and they're fine Christians. They're like, why do I need to be a thinker? I have my faith. Why do I need to know about proofs? Listen, because the New Testament wouldn't exist without proofs. None of the 8 authors of the New Testament would have written a word of the New Testament had not they seen Jesus alive and had the evidence to bear that out. So there's a blessing on this kind of activity that we're talking about of studying the evidence for our faith.
We'll come back and talk about 10 of those discoveries. And because we've had Titus Kennedy with us talking about some of the archaeology, we have touched on 1 or 2 of those, the Miracle Cup and the James Ossuary. But I thought we would come back, obviously, and talk about the Shroud of Turin. Who is that man in the shroud? What evidence do we have of that? And again, back to the point you were making just a minute ago, in terms of this extra biblical evidence of Jesus apart from the Bible. I know years ago at Probe Ministries, we had one of our individuals, Dr. Michael Gleghorn, wrote a piece, and it was just on extra biblical references to Jesus. That to this day still is one of the more popular entries on our website, and it just illustrates again that what you are trying to do here and how you are trying to answer some of your children's questions are still going to be very relevant. And Jeremiah, for just a minute, let's talk about maybe a little bit of your coming to make the first chapter of the Shroud of Turin, because again, you have, I think even when you were talking with Eric Steckelbeck, talk about the fact that you'd sort of challenged that, you sort of wondered about that. Gary Habermas wrote the foreword to your book on Body of Proof. You have his huge tomes on the issue of the resurrection. You had written probably thousands of words on the idea of the resurrection, and came in some respects with a fairly significant amount of skepticism to this whole idea of the shroud. Is that true?
That's exactly right, Kerby. It's well said. I was very skeptical. In fact, you had mentioned some of my books earlier in the program. I wrote a whole book called Body of Proof and never mentioned the shroud. And because of the defense of our faith and the resurrection is so airtight, we don't even need the shroud. But it turns out we have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to the evidence of Jesus. The best established fact of the ancient world is Jesus' death and resurrection, death by Roman crucifixion and his physical bodily resurrection. If we can't believe that based on the evidence, we should not believe that Jesus crossed the Rubicon, that Caesar crossed the Rubicon. And one of the interesting things about the Shroud of Turin is that the greatest scientific minds of our time, I'm talking about nuclear scientists, I'm talking about rocket scientists, they truly cannot explain how there's an image of a crucified man that matches the gospel accounts of Jesus's passion, how that can exist. And we can talk about that if you want to, but it's really an amazing thing when you think about the fact that the greatest scientific minds that have tested the shroud, they can't replicate the image that's on it with how the image sets on there. And biblically, I can say as an exegete, it matches the accounts in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, exactly, with a probability of a 1 in 200 billion chance it's not the Jesus of the Bible, according to one mathematician named Bruno Barbaris. And so it's amazing that you could believe, I don't think you could believe that the shroud belonged to anyone but the resurrected Christ.
Yes, I was going to ask you, have we ever done a calculation on, if we looked at the 7 significant characteristics, what the probability would be? But that shows up in your book as well. And just for a minute, there are individuals that in the past have probably seen some attempts to discount that because of a misunderstanding. But we do know a lot of things, not the least of which is that this image rests only on the outermost fibers, less than a micron deep, about 0.2 of a micron deep. And again, that's something that you could look up in a textbook to see how small that is. And some of the earlier statements being made about carbon dating and things like that, we now know a lot more. So in some respects, the attempts to discount it have led to further investigation. And I've seen pictures of you with 2 of the most prominent researchers who have really essentially spent their lives looking at this, right?
That's exactly right. You're speaking of Paulo de Lazzaro, who's a physicist who was only able to change the fibrils of a linen shroud using his laser, and it was the size of like a postage stamp. And his laser beamed at 34 billion watts, but it was also the speed at which the light burst. It was 1/40th of a billionth of a second. And so Paulo says that the amount of power, according to this physicist, that it took to bring Jesus back from the dead is 3 to 4 times the amount of power that we have on earth. And so what's really cool for the Christian listening is it says that when we believe and trust in Christ, Romans 8:11 carries a promise with it that the same power that raised Jesus from the dead dwells in us. And so that will help us with any challenge we're facing today. You mentioned another scholar, Bruno Barbaris. And by the way, the irony of his last name is not lost on me. He's a mathematician from the University of Turin. And he did do a probability, and this is what I have imaged in my book. You can actually see his probability. He says it's a 1 in 200 billion chance it's anyone other than Jesus of Nazareth, and that's coming from a mathematician named Bruno Barbaris. And so those are just 2 of the 102 different academic disciplines, Kerby, that have studied and appreciated the authenticity of the shroud. And then we have to ask, well, who is the man of the shroud? And that's what my book makes the claim. It's Jesus of Nazareth. It's Jesus physically, bodily resurrected. So it's not a death cloth. It's a resurrection cloth. It's a snapshot of the moment of Jesus' resurrection.
Yeah, you've called it the first selfie, if you will. But here it's a photographic negative of, again, what you call the explosive event in the history of creation. And we're talking about something, again, if people watch some of your videos, if you take your camera and turn it around so that you can see the image, only later did we understand some of the aspects of that. But again, when you look at some of the various elements, individual carries across, nailed, where those wounds are, those kinds of issues, they all, as you said, match up very well with what Professor Barbaris actually talks about. And it's just a good illustration of the fact that whatever it is, it certainly seems to be evidence. We don't base our evidence on a relic or an artifact, but the more we know, the more likely it seems to be. Is that fair?
Absolutely, and the science draws that out, and we see that testimony even unfolding with the wide-angle X-ray scattering. The shroud has been tested in so many different ways than the carbon dating, and wide-angle X-ray scattering made global headlines. It's summarized as waxus, and it showed that the shroud has been getting old for 2,000 years compared with another linen shroud from Masada, dated to AD 70. And so it's really phenomenal that the shroud is the most studied archaeological artifact in the world. There's not a close second. It's also been the most lied about artifact in the world, I would say. And for believers, it confirms so much of what we read about in the resurrection narratives embedded in our Gospels. It's overpowering evidence in my mind. And I believe the shroud is authentic. I say it now this way, Kerby, because I'm not irrational.
Yes. Well, and again, for just a minute, some of our listeners might actually want to come to Cascade Hills or wherever you might be holding that. The thing that they will see there, of course, is a replica of the shroud, the crown of thorns. They will see the nails, although I would call them, they're so long, spikes, which reminds me of something else. You know, a couple of Easters ago, you well are aware of the fact that there was at least one editor at a Christian magazine, which I think highly of, but then this particular case speculated that maybe Jesus was not actually wounded. He really wasn't penetrated. He wasn't nailed to the cross for our inquisitions, our sins and things of that nature. And as a result, you actually wrote an essay to counter that, because one of the things we do see in the shroud is an individual that has been nailed to a cross.
That's exactly right. And we would show persuasively that we have 21 different victims of crucifixion that we have discovered who were nailed to crosses. And so what has the most explanatory power is the fact that on the image in the shroud, there are crucifixion nail wounds through the proper places, being the wrist and through the heels of the crucified man of the shroud. And that's exactly how the Romans practiced crucifixion. It turns out that the Judean province of Rome was one of the most brutal places to be executed. We actually have another artifact. It's not one of my 10 in the book, but we actually have Yehohanan's heel bone. I'm sure you've heard about it from others, and it's a 6-inch fish-hooked iron crucifixion nail that has remnants of a crucified heel bone on it. And so, again, that's consistent with what we read in the biblical narratives, and why that matters to this conversation is we see all of those matching up with the image in the shroud.
Well, if nothing else, I wanted to say thank you for having dealt with that issue a few years ago, because, you know, Jesus was pierced through for our transgressions, and that is something that we need to talk about. And it's, again, just a need for us to sometimes address some of those issues. So we're going to take a break, and we'll come back, and let's pick up at least a few others. First of all, can we establish that Jesus was there? How was maybe this story of Jesus even began to be presented to, say, people in Egypt when they tried to make sense of his miracles? What about, do we have even possibly the bones of the brother of Jesus? Do we have any evidence of Pontius Pilate? What kind of evidence is existing there? These are all great discoveries which can be found in the book, The Jesus Discoveries, 10 Historical Finds that bring us face to face with Jesus. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to know a little bit more about the book, we encourage you to click on that picture there of Jeremiah Johnston. That will take you to ChristianThinkers.com. There's a place where you can, number one, find out about the book, where you can actually sign up to get his newsletter and all sorts of updates. You can see some of the interviews he's done with a variety of different individuals, and I think that would be helpful as well. And if you do know that this Shroud of Turin exhibit is near, I would encourage you to go and check it out.
Hey there, Megan Kitchen here, creator of the Highlights podcast. Sorry to interrupt, but I would like to ask a small favor if I could. If you appreciate anything about today's episode or it enhances your own point of view, would you please let us know? You can do it easily by sending an email to podcastcomments@pointofview.net. When you email us your feedback, it helps me to create more episodes based on topics that help you and your friends discern a biblical perspective on the world. So, penny for your thoughts? Again, that email is podcastcomments@pointofview.net. Now, back to the episode.
Let me also point you to ChristianThinkers.com. And Jeremiah, one of the things I appreciate about a post that came out the other day was your statement about the exact date of Jesus' crucifixion and how we know it. Because back in the 1980s, there was a fair amount of astronomical data that had come out at the time, and I wrote a column that even appeared in the Dallas Morning News. Colin Humphreys and some others looked at the astronomical issues, and I tied it in with a book by, at that time, one of our professors at Dallas Seminary, Dr. Harold Honer, on the chronological aspects of the life of Christ.
Right.
And then if you tie that into the 69 sevens of week or 69 weeks in the book of Daniel, I came up with and got criticized for it all the time with the idea that Jesus was crucified on April 3rd, AD 33. And so when I see your article, I kind of hold my breath, and you come to the same conclusion. So I feel vindicated.
You should, and your work was well. And by the way, shout out to Professor Honer as well. But it's unimpeachable that the best date, and I talk about this in the Jesus Discoveries. I mean, isn't that cool that we can know the actual date that Jesus was crucified and therefore also resurrected? And it is based on a collaboration of different evidences, one being the lunar calendar that was 14th of Nisan, fell twice on Friday during Pontius Pilate's reign. We know Pilate's reign was 26 to 36, maybe 37 AD, so it had to be in that general area. The other proponent is AD 30, but in my opinion, that's far too early. It doesn't give enough time for Jesus's ministry and John the Baptist, et cetera, et cetera. And so I am persuaded. I mean, we just celebrated Easter not long ago on the very day, April 5th, that Jesus rose again.
So again, I think that is just another aspect of that. You can read that in your Christian Thinkers column, but let's, if we can, jump on to a couple others. The Magician's Cup. This one, or sometimes called the Jesus Cup, is actually found fairly far away, and you might say, well, why would we refer to Jesus as a magician? Can you explain?
Absolutely. This is another great discovery that shows the power. Remember, Jesus is made famous as a miracle worker and as an exorcist long before his death by crucifixion and resurrection. Remember when the disciples of John come to Jesus and they say, hey, we just want to make sure we got it right. Are you sure that you're the Messiah? That's the disciples of John the Baptist. Jesus responds with evidence in Luke 7:22. He says, the blind see, the deaf hear, and the lame walk, and then the dead are necrosogyro, literally the dead stand up. And so Jesus was famous as a healer. 25% of the Roman Empire, Kerby, was sick, dying, or in need of immediate medical attention on any given day in the life of Jesus' ministry. And so the fact that Jesus would heal people and he wouldn't charge for it was totally innovative. And something that people figured out was there was power related to invoking the name of Jesus. And so in the book, what's fascinating to me is we actually have Jesus's name on different magic spells,
yes,
prayers, incantation. These are all totally outside of the Bible, but these are individuals who had heard of this wonderful miracle worker who, when you when you would insert this name Jesus, it had power to it. And so Frank Gaudio, and again, I have pictures of this in the Jesus Discoveries, the translation is Ho Goestes Die Christou, through Christ, the enchanter, the magician. We don't know the actual setting, but we do know it's AD 50. So this could be the earliest artifact that we have with the name of Jesus Christ on it. And maybe they were, it's speculation. Maybe they were making fun of Jesus as a healer. We don't know that. What matters is that it's datable, and people knew of Jesus' healing power. And again, that's consistent with the Bible. And so all of this helps us with my CIA method of Bible study, Kerby: context, interpretation, application. When I know more of the context that, I'm reminded Jesus was a huge miracle worker, then I can interpret the passages with more precision and then apply them to my life for life transformation. And that's what you do every day on the show so powerfully, you and your team.
I might just mention, too, there's some other places where they're making fun of Jesus, but let's talk about the earliest skeptic to Jesus, and that's your brother, and this is the James Ossuary. Again, we need to give a little history, which you do a very good job at the end of your book on explaining burial practices and the rest, but anybody that's ever gone with us or with you or anybody else to Israel knows that you would put a person in a tomb, eventually then come back and put the bones in a box called an ossuary. This one is very unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, because, and great job on explaining that so clearly. We have a limestone bone box, but it's inscribed James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. Now, that's the innovative part. It was discovered in 2002. It's gone through all kinds of skepticism, but the earliest epigraphers who publish on it believe that they're really talking about the Lord's brother, because we have no other ossuaries that want to define themselves not only by whose son they are, but whose brother they are. So it's likely authentic. I think it provides one of the earliest archaeological links to Jesus's immediate family. It affirms the historical reality of James, who was a leader of the Jerusalem church, who, according to Josephus, was martyred for his faith in AD 62. Dying, Kerby, to believe that his brother was actually the resurrected Son of God. Now, I have 4 sons. None of them think the other one is the Son of God. I can guarantee you that. And so what's cool about this is it shows us that Jesus appears to those who were for him. He appears to those who are indifferent to him, and he appears also to those who are hostile against him, and includes members of his own immediate family. We see that in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 7, and he appeared to James. I love that. And so we probably have James's bone box, his ossuary, and there's images of that in my book.
Again, I might just commend you, because I'm well aware of what you have to sometimes pay for some of these images, and I've done that, for example, on books that I've written on like paleontology and things like that, and that really does help. But just before I take a break, there are so many we could cover, but I thought a lot of people say, well, okay, maybe I know Jesus exists, but do we even know Pontius Pilate exists? And first of all, if you ever go on a tour to Caesarea Maritima, right there you have what's called the Pilate Stone. But even more significant, and I put this in our little booklet on archaeology, they found a ring that's over in the Herodium, which is kind of over closer to, say, where Bethlehem is. But nevertheless, this ring was discovered many years ago, but now they were able to read that it has Pontius Pilate's name on it. So whether you look at a stone or whether you look at a ring, we have, again, very good archaeological and historical evidence of Pontius Pilate.
Yeah, it's really powerful. I mean, what you've just laid out, and again, what I was reflecting on is the Bible deniers from years ago. They said that Pontius Pilate was a fictitious person, that he didn't really exist. And yes, when you see the Pilate inscription and then this, what we think is like a signet ring, it confirms the Bible's narrative. And of course, Bruno Bauer was one of the mentors of Karl Marx. You've taught us all about Marxism. And he was one of the skeptics, the German higher skeptics. And man, I'd hate to be Bruno Bauer today, because a few hundred years ago, he claimed that Pilate was a fiction, that he was made up. And again, this is where history and Christianity are best friends. And that affirms our faith. Again, it just affirms, because if the things we believed really happened, and they did, there should be fallout in the archaeological world. And there is. And people are being encouraged right now listening. Well, yeah, this gives me more confidence in what I believe. It brings me closer to Jesus, and it gives me more confidence in Scripture and how to apply it to my life. That's the whole point of what we're doing. We're just helping people apply the Bible better to their lives using these amazing discoveries that bring us face to face with Jesus.
You know, I just mentioned a few of the archaeological discoveries, but you have a whole section here on the early skeptics. And again, people fail to understand that there were people that lived during the life and times of the disciples. If the disciples got something wrong, or they did not accurately explain the history or the evidence, there were many who would be glad to challenge them. We do, of course, see some examples where they, later on, we have evidence of insulting Christians and the rest. But whether it is Josephus or a variety of other names that would probably only be aware to people that are New Testament scholars like you, we just have so many different records, whether archaeological, historical records, that verify what you call the Jesus discoveries.
That's exactly right. And why is this important? We have a skeptical world out there that wants to know that our belief is an evidence-based belief system. Our faith is evidence-based. It's many infallible proofs, what we already said in Acts 1:3. And this also helps us to show our children that these events really happened, that Jesus did fulfill messianic prophecy, that he came and he literally, utterly transformed the world. We had to change the calendar because of him. And these all just give us greater assurances in our faith. And that's why it's so important for us to know these things.
And Jeremiah, I thought for just a minute we might talk about part 2 and 3 of your book. As a fellow author, I sometimes smile because sometimes people will pick out 1 or 2 pieces from your book, and you didn't write 170 pages worth to actually ignore the last part where you talk about recognizing Jesus as the intellectual he is. And this is some of the things I thought might be worth talking about for just a minute, because it really underscores why you develop Christian thinkers as an organization and why you're the pastor of apologetics and cultural engagement at your church. Because you know as well as I do that in the past we had Harry Blamires wrote a book called The Christian Mind, in which he was saying, really, Christians don't have a mind. Mark Knoll wrote The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind. And you felt a real need for us to say, we need to be thinking Christians. And as you said just a few minutes ago, sometimes we have this idea that, well, I'm just pious. I believe it. I just take it all on faith. Well, we have work to do with a skeptical generation that needs to see that there is evidence which is coming our direction. And so that's why you point out that even when, Time Magazine picked out the 50 greatest thinkers in history, yeah, Jesus wasn't on the list. And I think we need to, as Christians, reassert that, don't we?
Absolutely. And again, it's why your ministry is so important, Kerby, and the listeners need to support Point of View and Turning Point, because Point of View is just such a important ministry for us. Because, Kerby, you do this every day for 2 hours. You equip us how to love Jesus with all our minds. And no one does it better than you, Kerby. So I commend you and thank the Lord for you, Kerby, for how God just keeps using you as a Christian scholar. But you're a scholar who can speak in the cultural vernacular like C.S. Lewis, and that's where God's using you. And so I can't thank you enough for having me on your show. And just thank you also, Kerby, for your stand for truth. There's only one Kerby Anderson, and I just love you, brother. You've believed in what God has called me to do since the beginning, and I want everyone listening to know how appreciative I am of you, because you literally embody the answer to the question you're asking me. Jesus is asked by the nomikos, the Pharisees, the grammatus, the scribes, what is the greatest commandment? And they were trying to trap Jesus. And Jesus responds, and he gives the great commandment: you will love the Lord your God with your heart, soul. And it's only Jesus could do. I loved about this with Jesus. He messianizes Old Testament passages and he applies them to himself. Well, Jesus modifies the Shema, love God with your heart, soul, and strength, and he adds mind. Love me with all of your mind. And that's where the Christian faith gets so exciting, when our faith is utterly different. Like, the deeper you go in Islam, the more it crumbles. The deeper you go in Christianity, the stronger it is. And so this is where I hope, and this is where I really appreciate you and your questions, Kerby, especially bringing up part 2. We have to recover the great intellectual tradition of our faith. Mm-hmm. I mean, Christians outthought all the competition. This is why Christianity gives birth to Western civilization as we know it. We advance as a civilization and a society because of Christian values that encourage evidence and learning and equality, and how the gospel transforms societies. And so what I'm hoping will happen is, right now, Kerby, I've never been more comfortable to have faith conversations with non-believers, just like I'm sure you are. And it's because the truth has not only pierced my heart, and I'm addicted to truth, but I see the impact it has on others when we share it. And so I want your audience to be equipped through my book of how to share these these amazing discoveries of Jesus that remind us that he was a thinking person and the most intelligent person to ever live. We have to recognize Jesus for who he was, fully God and fully man, and the smartest man who ever lived, and we should follow in that tradition.
Well, again, you did your doctorate at Oxford. More recently, you took this message to Davos, and it does seem to me that as we are starting to find so much is coming our direction. I've said before that I think in some respects we're having this great, if you will, recovery of some of these ideas in archaeology, in science. Just think about all the advances in science right now in terms of intelligent design, all the different books that have come out from individuals writing about Christian archaeology and biblical archaeology and things of that nature. So this is a great time to be alive, to be doing apologetics, defense of the Christian faith. And I so appreciate the many books we mentioned a few minutes ago, The Body of Proof, 7 Best Reasons to Believe in the Resurrection of Jesus, which I highly commend to anyone. The 10 Historic Finds in the Jesus Discoveries. We do this because we are convinced that if anything, we as Christians can stand the test of time. And in many cases, you've had to go into some of those particular discussions discussions where somebody's just read Bart Ehrman or someone else and begin to clarify some of the misconceptions there. So this is why we need these books. This is why we need our listeners to read these books and to even take this interview today and pass it on to others, or go to ChristianThinkers.com and see some of the other interviews you've done and maybe even schedule you to come and speak. So I think that this has been just a great time to really just barely touch the surface of what you've written in this book. And I know you're going to be writing future books in the future to just equip the saints so that they will be more effective in the ministry.
Well, and I want to just, again, thank you, Kerby, because, I mean, you've been having me on your program for years because you've believed in God's call in my life. And I'm just praying that there'll be a lot of other Jeremiah Johnstons and Kerby Andersons out there who say today, as a result of this broadcast, I'm going to be a better Christian thinker. I'm going to be equipped. I'm going to have answers to have a conversant faith. I'm going to know how to contend for my faith. And this is what you do to equip us so well. And this is what's fun. I love that you point this out. We're living in a fun time to be a Christian. Yeah, it's difficult. There's no question. There are so many challenges opposing our faith, but it's also, I think, the most rewarding time to be a follower of Jesus. We have so many discoveries. I mean, Augustine, Charles Spurgeon, these guys, they didn't have access to the discoveries that we have that confirm the central message of the Bible, Kerby. And this is a really fun time, I think, to be a follower of Jesus. And yes, there are always concerns. And society has different questions today than what Christians face in the first century, but you help us every day on Point of View and how to answer those. And that's why I'm always delighted to join you and Stephen, the producer, the whole team at Point of View. You guys are all amazing. So just so appreciate you and your ministry.
Well, again, say hello to your family. Of course, we've had some of them in the observation room before.
That's right.
If nothing else, that was fun.
The observation room will never be the same.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun, too. But again, I appreciate you. And again, for our listeners, there are some opportunities for you to meet him. If not, you might want to schedule him to come and speak. And most importantly, the book, The Jesus Discoveries, 10 Historic Finds That Bring Us Face to Face with Jesus. Don't forget, of course, the body of proof, 7 best reasons to believe in the resurrection of Jesus and why it matters today. Dr. Jeremiah Johnston, always great to have you on the program.
Kerby, love talking to you. Thanks for having me.
Well, hope you enjoyed the interview because, again, this is a very important issue. And if you'd like to know more, of course, you can go to the website, which is pointofview.net. We look forward to seeing you next time right here on Point of View Highlights.